Hey everybody, welcome to Tuesday. Yes, starting on the banner again to solve, at least partially solve, that audio sync problem. For some odd reason, there's still a little bit of a delay. I don't know what's going on with OBS. Really frustrating. I think it might be my USB hub. But today we're going to try something I've been talking about trying to do for a while now. And that's talk about things involving men. Now, I finally feel comfortable enough talking about this because of my Leanna Cares clients. I don't have to try to read minds or anything like that. I can talk to people about their challenges and learn from them and report, anonymously, obviously, sort of the general trends I'm hearing from people, actually talking to people who are affected by this stuff. That's the way I prefer to do things, right? Because I normally go part theory, part my own experience and mix them all together in something that's interesting, but also fact-driven. Obviously, I can't do that from the perspective of someone who society treats as male. And I say that very specifically, someone society treats as male. Because when we're looking at, the title of the video, where did we go wrong examining masculinity, right? The primary experience we're dealing with here is people who don't ever question their gender, right? It's just, oh, I'm a man, so it means these things. And there are a lot of competing theories about where the identity ends and the constructs surrounding gender begin. And by that, I mean what is an inherent sense of being, which is very real for a lot of people. Not everybody, but very real for a lot of people. And then there's the behaviors we're taught to do to properly perform our gender. This is a theory that started in the 1990s, gender performativity theory, created by a philosopher named Judith Butler. And unfortunately, gender performance has been lumped in with queer theory or LGBTQ plus theory, not feminist theory. So it tends to get neglected in favor of the male gaze and things like that. I actually think it doesn't completely explain it. No model does. But I actually think that Butler's work is much more complete in terms of explaining what we observe. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't something to the idea that people change their behaviors when they know they're being watched. And that is the part of gaze theory that gets dropped when we talk about the male gaze. Now, you guys who have watched my channel for a while know I'm not a big fan of male gaze theory. It's too broad. You cannot... Every product that is made is the hopes, dreams, and kinks of the particular people who made them and the people who give them the money and the people who are distributing it. The Hollywood gaze is really more accurate than the male gaze. Male, as a group, is just way too big to single on one gaze. Different men don't find the same things attractive. They're not interested in the same types of stories. They don't want to see men or women all depicted in the same way. And, the whole idea of film spectatorship, even within feminist theory, it gets subdivided. And ironically, Bell Hooks talked about the oppositional gaze, and that tends to get left out by people who claim to be intersectionalists. The idea Bell Hooks talked about is that especially Black people reject the cinematic gaze to an extent. They don't buy into it, and so they're sort of either using it as a safe space to look at white people or openly mocking it and getting an oppositional view of self. And that was an earlier talking like Jacques Lacan, Jean-Paul Sartre, concept of the gaze is, the act of looking, the act of being looked at has a dynamism, it has a power. And people learn how to self-define by watching other people and responding to the way we're judged by external forces. So the gaze is said to be how we define and redefine ourselves. And I think that's very true. I mean, the fact that so many people are so upset when a character is race swapped or gender swapped. That's the response to that, right? That somebody who felt close to the character, they feel like they can no longer define or redefine themselves through that character because now it's not like them. That's subjective and there's no morality there. I define myself a lot by, characters that don't look like me. I know a lot of people on this channel say they have no problem playing and, relating to characters who don't look like them. It's not just about looking like you, right? Media normalizes behavior. That doesn't mean it changes people's behavior. It means it gives people a sense of what is appropriate in society, what different roles mean, what behavior is acceptable with different types of people. And two things have happened fairly recently that are making things really difficult for men. One is that in the whole examination of, the imaginary male gaze, it hasn't just been an examination of it, right? It's been an outright demonization of it. Male gaze bad, right? Then there's this additional post-Me Too thing where men are acutely aware that they're being watched by society. And we go back to my buddy Michel Foucault and talking about surveillance, the surveillance state, the awareness that there is always someone watching your behavior, seeking to punish you for transgressions and things that are against the rules. And Foucault talked about the surveillance's power for spreading domination, that merely knowing that you are being watched by some authority figure will cause people to self-police and curb their own behaviors. It changes the way they're behaving because they no longer have privacy, and that affects people's behavior. And that's an interesting shift in things associated with masculinity, because the difference between masculinity and femininity is post-industrial age spaces, especially post-war, post-Great Wars, like World War I, World War II spaces, have been masculine originally with women kind of reworked in, because public spaces were masculine spaces. Women stayed home for their own protection. It was a big bad world out there, and you wouldn't want to get something terrible happen to you. And even that alone changes socialization. That changes the learned behaviors that people have, right? This idea that the world is looking to do terrible things to you just because you're female. A lot of people internalize that. I got in a lot of trouble when I was on TV because there would be certain shoots that, the otherwise all male crew would go, "This is too dangerous. You shouldn't go to this," on a comedy show. And I'd say, well, if it's too dangerous for me, isn't it possibly too dangerous for you guys? Like, a dangerous environment is a dangerous environment, right? But of course, the whole idea was it's too dangerous because you're a woman. And why is that? What specific sphere of humanity is so inherently misogynist that a woman shows up and she's immediately in danger? That's something that is something of a self-fulfilling prophecy. right? The idea that in a bad neighborhood, men are expected to, say, walk to their car alone at night, but women aren't. It's socially acceptable for a woman to ask for an escort. It's, less so for men. Why is that? If it's a dangerous neighborhood, a guy could get mugged. He could get jumped. Why should men have to take that risk? Oh, because there's no fear of the guy lurking in the bushes looking to assault a poor defenseless woman. When we break it down, it seems absurd, right? If people are looking to commit a crime because it's a bad neighborhood, well, jumping a guy for his wallet seems like something that could happen. But we don't think about these things. We just replicate these gendered behaviors. The flip side to that is there's social punishments for women who want to be seen. And this is something that the male gaze theory has actually perpetuated, right? The idea that anytime a woman presents herself as sexy, that's for men. That's for men looking at her. It's not something she just wants to do because she happens to like it. It makes her feel powerful. It makes her feel pretty. It makes her feel confident, right? So women get punished because the idea that wanting, assumedly, men to look at you that way is somehow arrogant or wrong or lacking humility, and any woman who decides to do that must be torn down by society, notably other women. And this is a very real thing. Flip side of that is this idea that men are inherently predatory, and that's just not true for the vast majority of men. Documentation and documentation and documentation and documentation, but these myths persist. And so we live in a world where, one, there's a real lack of diverse male role models now, because it's getting somewhat better, but there's either kind of sitcom guy or action hero guy. And because they're trying to diversify casts, which, laudable goal, right? But they're making these big ensemble casts on television shows and in movies. And so every character gets less time. So it's harder for them to have meaningful plots. And in a world where masculinity is changing rapidly, and the expectations on men and the way men are expected to perform their masculinity is changing rapidly, the lack of media narratives that sort of show how that goes through is a real problem, because it's not, when culture move more slowly, they could be taught by male family members or teachers or things like that. Teachers still have a really important role to play, I think. But the shift in Me Too is so sudden that previous generation of men don't actually have the framework for younger men to learn. That it didn't exist when these older men were learning to navigate the world, right? So there's a real catch-22 going on here. And again, diversifying media is good. There are certain stories, though, that, and certain characters that are inherently male. I argue Black Panther is an inherently male character. I think it's very important that Black boys have role models that are not all necessarily rooted in the American experience, right? Allowing Black boys to get a sense of self through the King of Wakanda, as opposed to, the any Black American superhero who is, inherently going to be impacted by generations of systemic racism. They're not the same thing at all, right? And when you're forming that defining and redefining thing, allowing people both allows them to define themselves, yes, with the survival skills they need to not get shot and stay to jail, as grim as that is. That's a big motivator. But okay, that's what you have to do. But when we talk about who you are, people should not have a sense of self rooted in oppression structures. There needs to be a purity of, if all that didn't exist, who am I? And what am I? And what do I want to be? That's very, very important for self-actualization. It's very, very important to be able to go into that space of, this is who I am. This is who I have to pretend to be so the world doesn't punish me, but this is who I am. Because if you know who you are, you can set goals for yourself. You can set goals for your life. You can get an element of personal satisfaction. You can game the system to get what you want. If you don't know who you are and what you want, you basically just try to survive the system, but you don't know, if you've got a series of choices, you don't know which moves to make because you don't know where you want to go. And it's amazing how many men I talk to who, they just want to stay out of trouble. There are other things they want. They want companionship. They want friendship. They want to be around other people, but they are so terrified of the accusation. They are so terrified of being seen as a creep that they don't engage. They don't socialize because better to be safe. It's sort of what women have done for hundreds of years. And I mean, I sort of see that of, don't make the first move. Don't seem too slutty. Don't seem too interested. Play hard to get, the passivity. And it's once again, a response to a perceived threat, right? For women, it's don't get raped. For men, it's don't get accused. This is not a functioning society. And this is where I think that the lack of everyman role models, that it's all superheroes, right? Okay, that gives archetypes of nobility and heroism and good men. But are they attainable or achievable good men for the average guy? No, those are heroes. Guys all the time say to me, that's not real. I don't see myself in them. I can't be that. We need more characters that are good men who seem achievable to the average guy. I mean, the guy I love is Ned Leeds in Spider-Man, especially in the movie. He's I don't know where the actor's from. Is he Hawaiian or something like that? But he's an everyman. He's the sidekick, right? But I love him. I think he's super awesome. And I think it's important to have these conversations about these supporting characters because guys can hear that people... he's Hawaiian Filipino, Jacob Batalon, the guy who plays Ned Leeds in the Spider-Man movies. But people hear like, oh my God, he's awesome. Somebody might look at that and go, okay, I can be that. I can model myself after that. And if that's something people like, then awesome. I mean, that's why I'd love the Marvel Cinematic Universe to do a sidekick show. Like get guys like Jimmy Woo and Darcy and all those people, the people who aren't superheroes, so they can have lives and have them achieving goals and falling in love and like almost like a sitcom style or like a single camera 1 hour comedy, like The Office type thing. But those are people that regular people can actually relate to and kind of go, okay, well, I can't be freaking Thor for numerous reasons, but I can do that. And that's how it works. That's how these social dynamics happen. Now, there has to be a certain quality of writing that actually involves proper socialization in the real world. And a lot of media does not have that. A lot of media overplays narcissism and sociopathic tendencies, and there are just too damn many anti-heroes out there. That's why I love, Superman and Lois, the CW show, because Superman is dad. That's a great role model. The fact that he's overwhelmed by dealing with his kids. Freaking Superman can't figure out teenagers. It's fantastic, right? Because the older you get, the more you get comfortable with that. I don't know how this freaking goes. You know what? I haven't known how things have freaking gone before, and I figured it out somehow. And we do need certain pathways to success. And right now, both men and women are shown a million different ways to do it wrong. They're shown no pathway to do it right. And then you got non-binary people and, trans people who are getting all these messages about, that's why for anybody who wonders why those of us who support trans men are men, trans women are women, why we feel so strongly about that is because trans people are a very small portion of the population. They're people who know what it's like to have to go from one series of socializations to another while still having a consistent internal identity. That's a really powerful journey, and there's a lot of wisdom in that. But especially trans men have been kind of invisible historically in media. But trans women were shown in like 70s cop shows and things like that in a very, very negative light, drug addicted prostitute kind of thing. So, I mean, anybody's going to look at that and go, well, I don't want to be that. So, we have to let people in to the binary gender club, right? Especially people who believe in binary gender. Because if cisgender men can't figure it out, and if cisgender women can't figure it out, and trust me, cisgender women can't figure it out either, guys. Like, it's a different set of problems, but it is a similar thing of, well, we know all the ways we're doing it wrong. How do we do this right? There's the virgin whore dichotomy means you have to pick one set of shitty trade-offs or the other. Men have a slightly extra complication in that traditionally men are still supposed to be the people who pursue the women. And that wasn't me. I got mocked. I got publicly shamed for asking guys out in junior high school and high school. It was not fun, which maybe is why I have more of a sympathy. Because I always thought, why shouldn't women do this stuff? I never understood the gender binary. Why are certain behaviors female and why are certain behaviors male? Why can't there just be human behaviors? And you get smacked down really hard when you step out of line in these things. So I get the challenges that men are going through of all the rules have changed. Nobody's telling us exactly how they've changed in the affirmative, what to do right. It's a lot of don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. By the way, unless you look like Jason Momoa, the things he does are creepy when you do it. That's fucking confusing. There should be one standard of behavior. We don't live in that world right now because anti-heroes, because machismo, because really toxic narcissistic behaviors end up getting wrapped up in Hollywood stuff. Because if somebody's not, an asshole, they're boring. No, it's possible to create a nice guy character who isn't boring. That's why I love the Ascendant comic that I've been promoting the shit out of lately. Because they have a family man guy, but they make the struggle to be a devoted, straight-laced family man interesting. You can't do it. It is interesting. We need more stories like that where it's not just the asshole boring dichotomy, right? You can be awesome without being an asshole. But, because people tend to learn through punitive norms, Foucault again, until they stumble upon the right answer, all they have is a series of bad experiences or a series of observed bad experiences. And that's where there's a different kind of male gaze going on. A guy is sitting here watching the news and watching media and watching all these stories about, guys like Johnny Depp. And, that narrative of, the perspective of people who relate to Johnny Depp, that here's this guy who has just been railroaded by this woman he married and the relationship went bad and she's out to ruin him. Like I said, that's one narrative in competing ones. I don't want to get derailed on this one, but they look at that and go, here's this big famous guy and it happened to him. What hope do I have? They are defining and redefining themselves through that trauma, through, and I think that's why the false accusation stories are like the car wrecks that people can't look away. They're becoming, the perception is that they are far more frequent compared to, all the legitimate accusations that don't necessarily make the press, because the filter for the press is how salacious it is, not how well the story checks out. Right. And that's an unfortunate thing about the whole thing, because it's like the tip of this very complex iceberg and they're only getting the most dramatic stories. But people are getting vicariously traumatized, and women are getting vicariously traumatized through all these stories of, female victimhood. It's scary. It infects you. I mean, I was really rocked by, pardon the pun, by The Slap, because I immediately identified with Chris Rock being a comedian that's been assaulted on stage. It's like, holy crap, yeah, I know that feel. That is a scary place to be. And it's not what happened, it's how much worse it could have been, how vulnerable you feel for quite a while afterwards. But then I started seeing all the Jada put him up to it stories. I'm like, hold up. Like, I am no fan of Jada Pinkett Smith. I think she's an obnoxious flake. Really, really beautiful, physically obnoxious flake. But there's no evidence of that. And that's its own sort of false accusation. And so women are being held under this, oh, well, you're either a doormat or you're a bitch. There's no in between. Right? So a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to be a doormat. So they embrace the bitch. And they find out too late that there are serious social punishments for being a bitch. Trust me, I got labeled one in television. People use it to ruin you. But then there's the other side, that people are using things to ruin men. And it's just this super predatory culture where 2 generations now of relatively young people, meaning younger than me, have been weaned on these societal cautionary tales. And they're locked up. They've been, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. The sky is falling, the sky is falling. And then, of course, the millennials went through school, was told that college is your ticket to a good job, got a very expensive college degree, took on a ton of debt, and oops, sorry, no jobs for you. You still got the debt, though. It's shitty for everybody involved. And me looking back as a Gen Xer who, we had to be very tough. There were a lot of things that were shittier back then. Gender roles were much more rigid. Just hard to figure out, but rigid in a different way. Because back then it was, guys didn't notice you if you're a good girl, but, if you were a guy somebody noticed, it was really easy to get labeled a slut. Now slut shaming is bad, but there's all these other things going on, right? But there seemed to be a greater tolerance for people to be able to go, hey, what the fuck, and deliberately non-conform and have people accept that more. There are so many rigidly punitive norms in society now via social media and the drama press. And it just keeps vacillating. I mean, people talk about the progressive stack and all that stuff, but trust me, the progressive stack is more like a bunch of tiles. It's like spread out cards, pick one. That's what it's constantly reworking, and it's situational. And these things are Byzantine by design. Because if nobody can figure it out, then there's a small number of people empowered to make those arbitrary choices, and they're the only ones that are in control. And everybody else spends all their time afraid of each other. And, you know, I come at this model because this is what happens in historically disenfranchised communities that are the intersection of sort of, you know, identity, discrimination, and poverty. You see a lot of social cannibalism going on because they're fighting for a piece of the pie they know is very, very small. These things come from somewhere, and it seems like an increasing section of the population is going into that, you know, fighting for a smaller and smaller piece of the pie. And that's why everything's so adversarial. But I do think we need new tools. I do think we need new ways of speaking about this stuff. And the first thing to do is throw out the male gaze, because it's just a shitty tool. Stop trying to make it work. It doesn't work. There are other frameworks that even greater gaze theory works better, that I just took you guys through, works better than Laura Mulvey's male gaze. This should stop being dominant. Like, it should stop being dominant in feminist circles. It should stop being dominant in the mainstream media. It's a reductive, simple concept, so people like to cling to it, but it's shitty. It doesn't work. We need new tools. And I'm hoping that what we can do together is come up with frameworks to discuss these things that the affected group, in this case men, are comfortable with. So I'm looking for your suggestions for that for future videos. What are some topics? What are some terminologies you want to see discussed? Anything I said here in this video feel like a more comfortable way of labeling and discussing these things? I'm really interested, because we can build on this. If it's workable here, we can, you know, pitch it to the greater world. Outrage warrior caught on instead of social justice warrior, right? Really interested in hearing your feedback, and help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, and one-time Leanna Care sessions for people who could really use it and can't afford it, coffee.com/Leanna K. Thanks for watching.